before I get started, I want to thank Brandon Hayes. Completely inspired me to fly up here from San Antonio, Texas, to give this presentation, and I also want to thank the Natural Law Institute for putting this on, so we can get together and we can link up. And I consider this an event where we break the AI algorithm when we meet face to face like this and share ideas, perceptions, and the reality of what's really going on in this world. So anyway, if you all in the back want to come forward, that's cool too. If not, you can go ahead and just silence your voices a little bit so everybody else can listen to the presentation. So I'll go ahead and get started. I titled this Casualty or Combatant, and as I go through it, might become more aware of why I did that, or maybe not. I'm going to go a little bit about me. I'm going to go into my military officer duties in general and specifically. I'll talk about 573 days of retaliation, the experimental weaponized COVID-19 mandates upon humanity, the psychological operations of public health, and the CV-19 Hegelian dialect. And then I'm going to go into talk about the pandemic reprimandos, military, We the People Network, and then lastly I'm going to finish off with a citation presentation for some special individuals here today. So about me, I was born right over the bridge, Newburyport, Massachusetts, Anna Jake's Hospital, family of 5. I got 3 brothers, 1 sister, and I grew up here until I was 19 years old, lived in Newbury, Massachusetts, graduated from Triton High School with Brandon. Brandon was a year ahead of me, and but I was very familiar with Brandon. I used to visit Rowley all the time. I had good friends over there. My brother and him wrestled together on the wrestling team, so I was inspired to come here because of him and what he did in the Triton Regional School. It was absolutely incredible, and I'm going to plug his video again. If you have not seen his 25-minute video, it's one of the most amazing, peaceful, non-compliance demonstrations I've seen for the last 3 years. And just an absolute warrior. And I am super proud and honored to be here with you all today to share a little bit of truth about what happened with and what's continuing to happen with our active duty military force, our Guard and Reserve. So I enlisted in the Air Force 2006. Like I said, I lived in Newbury, Massachusetts till I was 19, served in the Air Force, went to basic training, immediately served the next 10 years of my life overseas. I served in Ethiopia, Arba Minch. I served in Europe, Germany. 2 of my kids were born in Trier, Germany, the oldest town in Germany. I served Tokyo, Yokota Air Base, Japan for 3 years, Korea, the Middle East, Central America, all around the world. So yeah, I was specifically a commissioned officer. I'll go into some of these details in a little bit more of a organized chronological manner. But my most recent duties were as a commissioned officer. So like I said, I enlisted in 2006, but in 2019, I earned a direct commission into the Medical Service Corps of the United States Army to be a preventive medicine officer, which is a fancy word for saying public health officer, and my specialty was in medical entomology. I served there until I was court-martialed, and I'll go into details about that a little bit, and then my unlawful discharge after 17 and a half years of service. So I got a master's degree in entomology from the University of Nebraska, management degree from the University of Maryland, University College, a CCF degree from Community College of the Air Force. I did this. So like I said, I came right out of high school into the military. So I did all my education on my off-duty time. It took me about, I would say, 13 years to get the master's degree from the time I started till finish, just because of all the constraints of military duty and all of that. But it proved to be fruitful. At least that's the way I look at it. And you'll kind of see why in a little bit. I served enlisted time. I served environmental pest management and the civil engineer. This is some of my training. Went through their occupational course. I highlighted this specific training because as I go through, this became extremely relevant for the last 3 years, and that's evasion conduct after capture training course. I served chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear threats in Pacific, Europe, Central Middle East, and in Louisiana as well. I went through the U.S. Air Force Basic Training Course, Airman Leadership School. I was a non-commissioned officer, went through the academy, and then I was a senior non-commissioned officer, and I did additional duties as a first sergeant, if anybody's familiar with the first sergeant position in the military. And then I did the senior enlisted joint professional military education, and then I went on to become a military officer in the Army. I went through the direct commission course and the medical service corps officer basic leadership course. So now my primary duties as a military officer, and the primary duties for any military officer, just in case anybody doesn't know, is to support and defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. That is our numero uno mission. We might have seen many who have been derelict in that duty for the last 3 years, but that is our primary mission. My secondary mission is to be a medical Army Service Corps officer, in which my duties were specifically as a medical entomology, but generally speaking, I was a public health officer, and my duty were to support the public health program. So the Army has an Army public health program. We protect service members from various different threats, whether it's non-battle related injuries, communicable diseases, seaborne threats, your chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear threats, and things like that. And my last assignment was at the Army Public Health Center. So like I said, I commissioned in 2019 into the Medical Service Corps of the Army, and they immediately sent me to the Army Public Health Center, which is in Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Maryland. I was there probably about 3 months, and they asked me, because of my background as a senior non-commissioned officer in the Air Force, if I would like to be the company commander or interview for that position. And so I did. I interviewed for that position. They selected me. I served in that position, and I served in that position from May of 2020 till July of 2021. And throughout my time, I was able to shield service members from some of this absolute, complete insanity that was coming down from the top of our leadership within the executive branch of government, trying to force service members into precarious situations, illogical situations. I mean, you all know the mandates. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but it was absolute insanity. So anyway, moving on to ethical orders, a duty to defy. Let me go back real quick because I want to touch on this. I kind of skipped over it. I talked about the military officer's primary mission, which is to support and defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. That is the only legitimate contract. It's a social contract. It's an actual contract. The only legitimate contract a service member has is their oath of office. It's an Army, in this case, my case, Army Form 71, oath of office. Another man or woman, usually in the grade of 03 or above, signs off on that, and I sign off on that to the social contract to we the people, to support and defend the Constitution. And I would argue and almost guarantee, it's probably a guarantee, that any of your public servants, whether they're local, state, or federal, also, military or not, signed a contract to support and defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. This is a very important point when it gets into this right here, ethical orders, a duty to defy. A service member has a duty to defy unlawful orders. But a service member also has the duty to professionally communicate with their chain of command if they are to receive what they perceive to be unlawful orders. In this case, I will skip to here. This is United States Federal Code 21-360 triple Bravo -3. An individual must be given the option to accept or refuse these experimental emergency use authorized products. What are the experimental emergency use authorized products of the last 3 years? They're the masks, they're the tests, and they're the injections. Whether you're sitting out there and you think because the media or some sort of public servant or some sort of figure in authority said you were receiving an FDA approved and licensed product, that was a complete and utter lie. You were experimented on and you were coerced through psychological operations in an attempt to get you to participate with those products. It was you were not free of coercion in that decision-making process. And you must have been given, whether you're a school teacher, whether you're a military officer or enlisted man or woman, whatever the police officer, you were by federal statute, because we were under a federal declaration of emergency, you were supposed to be given the option to accept or refuse those products. But I can almost guarantee everybody in this audience was not given or afforded that opportunity. But being a medical officer at the Army Public Health Center, I had a duty to defy because I knew the orders were unlawful. But in the process of defying, I had a duty to properly communicate to my chain of command to give them an option to follow the law. Now, after I properly serve them with the law and communicate the unlawfulness of the order, they then have two options. They can ignore me, right? Or they can work with me and serve with me and push this higher to our commanding generals and to our executive branch administration to let them know, hey, pump the brakes. We have an emergency experimental use product. We need to make sure we're giving service members and basically everybody else the option to accept or refuse. So this right here is a formal Article 138 complaint. A formal Article 138 Uniform Code of Military Justice complaint is a service member's ability to redress and petition their chain of command when they perceive something to be wrong, right? And so what was wrong? The infractions in the complaint were the unlawfulness of the order, right? Because you cannot force and coerce service members into participating with experimental products. And number two, coming from a medical standpoint, we had signals, and we have signals in the data that shows that these products are not only experimental, but they're dangerous and deadly. And so this was my formal Article 138 to my chain of command to try to perform a redress and for them to work with me and push this higher up to our federal government leadership. So I said, and this was my last page of my requirements that I needed from them, and I commanded in, as part of my duties as a lesser magistrate, cease and desist all discrimination against against me or any individuals of firmly held religious beliefs and or strong convictions against the COVID-19 quote-unquote vaccinations. We know they're not vaccinations. The mRNA gene therapy, experimental testing products, experimental masking, and I go on to list these things out. And what happened next was quite, I'll call it quite just absolute belligerent and insanity that ensued after. So After that documentation was submitted to the commanding general, I received the following. I was charged with Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 92. I was banned from all Army Public Health Center facilities, which was my place of duty. My security access, my clearances suspended, promotion to captain withheld, threatened with Leavenworth imprisonment, was court-martialed, I was dubbed an insider threat, I was escorted to behavioral health, I was CPS and military family advocacy weaponized against my family and my children, and I was eliminated from service after 17 and a half years with a general discharge, unacceptable conduct. That all happened in a matter of 573 days. So it was 573 days of retaliation. It was 573 days of evasion conduct after capture. And why do I say that? Because after I submit those protected communications to my chain of command, which is anything that involves a violation of regulation, a violation of federal law, or specific dangers to public health and safety, specific and known threats to public and substantial known threats to public health and safety, that's protected communication. Those are the federal statutes. Those aren't the laws of the people. These are the federal statutes the federal government created. This was out of the anthrax debacle when we were experimenting on service members with the anthrax injections. The reason why we had this legislation and these codes was to ensure we didn't go down that road again, yet here we are so many years later doing the same playbook, the same coercion tactics, but only this time we had federal laws protecting service members and darn near everybody in this room, in which they blatantly, belligerently ignored. And what went on to happen is I went through this training, evasion conduct after capture, 2013, prior to a contingency operation in Africa. And this training and what I learned in this training, what the military gave me in this training, was more applicable in the last 3 years than in any time in the last 17 years of service, because my own government turned on me as a foreign belligerent occupation and started coming after myself, not only myself, but the tens of thousands of other service members who also submitted protected communications to their chain of command. And I say tens of thousands because they discharged 10,000 plus service members for refusing these experimental injections, but it's probably close to hundreds of thousands who actually submitted protected communications to their chain of command, warning them that they're violating their federal statutes, they're violating the law, they're violating regulations, they're violating their social contract with the American people, right? And so it turned into basically a sting operation after that. And because everything after this right here turned into official communication that they were signing off on. They were signing off on their own crimes. So when you retaliate against a protected communicator for doing their job, doing their duty, it's criminal. It's criminal. And so when you retaliate through various different means, like dubbed an insider threat, and they sign off on that paperwork, or you sign off on CPS and military family advocacy program being weaponized against my children, after I asked the commander, hey, did you recuse yourself from this process? The same commander that signed off on my court-martial to send me a court-martial. Did you recuse yourself from this process? Hint, hint, recuse yourself from this process. Recuse yourself from this process. No, instead they go ahead and sign off on the paperwork. Of course it's unsubstantiated, but the amount of coercion and harassment and retaliation I received after submitting official documentation to my chain of command and doing my official duties as a public health officer was, it's criminal and it's documented. So anyway, this is an example. We had the danger signals in the front line with the frontline doctor testimony. I don't know if anybody out there is familiar with Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, flight surgeon from Alabama, active duty Army flight surgeon who wrote a declaration and whistleblower testimony about the effects she was seeing at her level with these injections upon her patient population. We had, so frontline data, we had the Defense Medical Epidemiological Database signals, where we had 1,100% increase in viral vaccine injuries in 2021 versus the last 5 years prior to that. Well, what changed in 2021 with the active service component was the mandates, the injections that rolled out in January of 2021. And so you had these huge signals that were going up. We also had the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Database from the Center for Disease Control, which is also the Department of Defense official reporting tool for adverse events. So when I submitted this to my chain of command, hey, you need to look at this. We need to evaluate the risk communication strategy that you have going out to service members, saying this product is safe and effective, and you need to include these signals in the risk communication strategy. Well, what happened after that? I was dubbed insider threat. They literally counseled me, took my government laptop away from me, and dubbed me an insider threat. Yes, I suppose that would be correct if we're talking about a foreign belligerent occupation. I am an insider threat. So, this is the data I submitted to a federal court case, which was Coker v. Austin. A bunch of service members got together to file a lawsuit against Secretary Austin. And in that, I showed the data from the database. And immediately after that, this isn't unclassified information. This isn't classified information. This is unclassified information. This is open source information. And so they retaliated after that. And I had to look my commander in the face. I said, hey, medical officer to medical officer, look at the data. Look at the data. And what is he literally puts his fingers in his ears. And I'm just like, it's incredible. And I'm sure many of you in this room can probably empathize with the insanity that we've dealt with the past 3 years. So this is a little bit of a timeline I broke down. So on the left here, you have where I submit the protected communications to my chain of command. Hey, you need to incorporate this data in the risk communication strategy, which was September of 2021. I have the, I can't see it, the chain, so the VAERS, violations of law, chain of command, the Article 138, all going up to warn them. Like, we have to warn people. We have to, communicate properly. We have to at least include this in the risk communication strategy. January 2022, I worked with Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, Lieutenant Colonel Pete Chambers, who's a Special Forces Green Beret. I worked with Major Sam Sigaloff in the Defense Medical Epidemiological Database right here, where we had those immense signals that we were showing in the data, showing all-cause mortality was just spiking through the roof. Myocarditis, pericarditis, cancers, all spiking. And so we submitted that to Senator Ron Johnson's office. In August of 2022, we found out that the military ran a bait and switch on the quote-unquote FDA-approved versus emergency use labeling. So they found some Comirnaty-labeled products, and they used that to further coerce people into thinking they were receiving some approved product by the FDA when really it was the experimental emergency use authorized, which again comes with the provisions of warning service members or giving them the option to accept or refuse. And that accept to refuse obviously comes without punishment. Like you can't, it's simply, hey, do you want this or not? Hey, we have this product for this emergency. Would you like it or would you not? That's how that works. Instead, it was, no, you're gonna take this whether you like it or not. Then we went on to, we wrote a whistleblower report, like I said here, about the bait and switch. This is also discussed in a book, which I'll get to later on. But we had 9 service members, 9 officers from each branch of service sign off on a whistleblower report that was sent to Congress that detailed the criminal activity from the Department of Defense. And then in 2022, they rescinded the mandate, right? So your politicians got up there and they stood up and they, how proud we are. We rescinded the mandate for our service members. And they took this I call a shadow game, a win, right? But what they're saying is we rescinded the mandate for something that was approved, but the problem was we never had that something that was approved. And so then the service went on to say, oh, well, they're good. Or the service went on to say, oh, the mandate's over. The mandate's over. And try to gloss past the fact that they committed crimes for the last 3 years of their federal statutes, of religious freedoms, of the Constitution, of our own regulations. And then in June of 2023, or May of 2023, I came across a program called the Public Health Perception Messaging Management Program. And this to me was quite eye-opening. I mean, I saw the risk communication strategy that was pretty eye-opening. But this perception management messaging human intelligence program, they were running human intelligence out of Army Public Health Center. And what they would do was they would target the local level medical treatment facility personnel at the local level. So your physician's assistants, your flight surgeons, your docs, your medics, and they would create informants out of them. And those informants would then talk to their patient population and get a read for the perception towards the injection, right? Towards the vaccines, towards the COVID vaccines. They would then communicate their perception towards this injection up to Army Public Health Center, and then they would then weaponize a risk communication strategy against that perception. So it would look something like this. If, for example, if you're a pregnant military service member, you go to your physician assistant, and let's say that physician assistant is an informant with the Public Health Center, and you say, I'm pregnant at this point in time, I'm worried about, the injection and what the effects may be on my child. I'm not at risk. I'm 20 something years old, XYZ. They would then translate that information up to the public health apparatus, and they would then weaponize risk communication specifically targeting pregnant women to increase uptake of the injection and decrease any possibility for a service member wanting exemptions from this experimental injection. Media, a duty to speak directly to the people. So this is something we haven't really seen throughout the past 20, 30 years, where you have an active service members. And there's a few of them out there that are speaking out, but normally you would never see an active duty service member speak on podcasts and very candidly. You would usually see a public affairs officer take that lead, right? And that public affairs officer would, message it and shape it however, higher approvals dictate. The problem was, when I went through all official channels to perform redress, to the point of getting court-martialed, to the point of appealing to the Army Court of Criminal Appeals, to the point of trying to appeal directly to the Secretary of the Army, to no avail, I have a duty at that point to speak directly to the American people and tell them exactly what's going on with the military, what's going on specifically with my situation. And what I do want to say is my situation's egregious, yes. It's completely ridiculous what they did when they tried to snuff me out. But that happened to, you can multiply that by close to 100,000 service members. Close to 100,000 service members to just simply try to get this experiment in their arms and things like that. So that was some of the media appearances I've done. There's more out there just to kind of get the truth out there in the alternative realms, because we know the mainstream media won't touch it. Just like that local newspaper. What's that local newspaper called? The Daily News of Newburyport? What a controversial event. It is pretty radical when you're telling the truth these days. I must say, like, they can't handle the truth. I don't know if there's anybody here from that newspaper, but man, you might maybe you rethink your position, start doing some regular journalism, right? Why do I have to do your job for you? Why do we have to do your job for you? Don't you get paid to do that? Oh, but that's right, you're in entertainment industry because of the Smith-Mundt Act of 2012, when you turned into legalized psychological operations against the American people. You might want to look into that one. The Smith-Mundt Act of 2012 legalized psychological operations against the American people through media apparatuses. That's why they're entertainment and not news. I mean, they were doing it prior to that too, but they got real bad then. Anyway, some more media appearances. So, I'll finish up here. I could ramble all night about the insanity that's happened. Because I needed to provide the documents to the American people, the whistleblower documentation, all that, I created a website. freedomfighter1776.com. You can go over there. You can look at all the evidence-based facts of everything I was communicating to the inspector generals, to the commanding general, to the secretary of the army directly, and you can look for yourself. I tend to tell people these days, do your own research. Don't believe a word I say. Look for yourself. Read the source documents, come to your own opinion, come to your own conclusion, make your decision based upon your research, your investment into looking at this stuff. Anyway, so that's the website. So there's a petition running out there. A Marine, he's still active duty. Joshua Hopi, he's a pilot down at Pensacola. He created a petition. This is for anybody here that would like to sign this petition, to get your name on it, to help support an investigation. But if the time should come, the investigation is going to be pretty quick because of that previous website and the documentation there. We already have their crimes. They signed off on them. Like they literally, we told them not to, please don't. And then they went on to sign off on their own crimes. So yeah, if you want to sign that, please QR code it, and share with your sphere of influence. That would be outstanding. But also, in there is supporting documents and evidence as well. So take a look at that at the very least. I can say Captain Hopi, he maintains the list and we send that list directly to elected officials to. I mean, it's part of a formality at this point. They're not doing anything, but, we got to properly communicate and put them on notice and give them that opportunity to do something. Give them a choice. Everybody's got a choice. Commander Robert A. Green, Jr., he is a commander, still active duty in the Navy, and he wrote this book, and it encapsulates everything I just said on a 40,000-foot view of what's happened the past 3 years within our military with these tyrannical mandates. But again, I'm giving basically a small part of the problem. The injections, the weaponized mandates is obviously just a part of the problem. There's a bigger issue at hand. We can talk about the fraudulent election systems, the school systems, it's all the monetary system, it's all connected. But for this specific issue, Rob does an outstanding job highlighting this and giving people hope who love liberty. And if I can give anybody hope here, because the story can be pretty ridiculous and depressing, is we still have hundreds of thousands of service members in uniform that knows what it means to support and defend the Constitution. They know and understand what that social contract means that they signed. And that certainly gives me hope. And I hope it gives you hope as well. Unconventional warfare, fifth generational warfare, insurgency, whatever you want to call it. The fact is we are at war. And you might be distracted with the Israel-Hamas kinetic war, or you might be distracted with the Ukraine-Russia kinetic war, or you might be distracted with something else. It's warfare. It's warfare. It's a belligerent infiltration. It's already at our shores. It's deep within the school systems. It's deep within the federal government. It's deep within your state governments. And so we need to be cognizant of that. And you can either be a casualty or you can be a combatant. And nobody is exempt from this war that we find ourselves in. We're all in this war. It's a war for the mind and soul. It's to be a casualty is to not use critical thinking skills. To be a casualty is to use left brain, emotional part of your brain, and just knee-jerk every time you see something on the news. That's to be a casualty. To be a combatant is to discern, is to slow down, is to gather information, is to not feed on anything that gets fed to you, is to question. It's a republic. If you can keep it, it starts with you. There's a reason you're here. There is a reason you're here. This country is founded on individual rights, not collective rights. Also, the Constitution doesn't grant you any rights. They're unalienable rights. You were born with them, right? The Constitution is simply a contract, a social contract between we, the people, and our form of government to help secure those rights. To help secure those rights, and they're doing a pretty piss poor job. I mean, here's the thing: they're not even doing the job. Like, it's not even close. It's not even close. That's why I call it foreign belligerence. And I kind of just go into more of that with our radical document, 1776, Declaration of Independence. Quite radical document, right? Governments are instituted among men, deriving just powers, keyword just powers from the consent of the governed. What is just? Just. And we need to know what words mean. Words are important. Definitions are just as important. Not Webster's dictionary of today, but go back a little bit. Maybe use a Black's Law dictionary, or maybe grab the Webster's of 1828 and use that one versus the Webster's of today. Because right now, I'm currently a homeschool dad due to the fact that I've been discharged. Still serving. I just don't get paid to serve. I'm a homeschool dad, and I was teaching my kids the importance of definitions. And one of the words we used and we looked at was contract. And so I took a Webster's dictionary of today, and I took I took the Black's Law fourth edition definition, right? The Webster's dictionary of today said, use the example to kill. Contract. To kill. That's what they used, right? Whereas you have the Black's Law dictionary, it's an agreement. It's a agreement between two parties, right? Whether one's artificial and a human, and a contractual service agreement, and kind of. But I just thought it was funny that the Webster's dictionary of today, out of all the things they could choose, they chose to kill, like a contract to kill. That's part of subliminal messaging, predictive type programming type stuff, right? So teaching and proper definitions, words. Increase knowledge and virtue. How do you secure your liberties, not freedoms, your liberties? Increase knowledge and virtue. You need to understand that liberty equals freedom plus morality. I mean, you're free to, be do whatever it is you want to do, but do you have the liberty sometimes? No, you do not. Not if it doesn't have morality, not if it violates another man or woman's, private property or physical being, whatever the case is. Anyway, I'm rambling. I could ramble all night. Psychological operations of public health, problem, reaction, solution. We all understand the Hegelian dialect. The biggest weapon that was used during COVID-19 is not the injections, right? The biggest weapon during COVID-19 was the testing. The testing, it created the start of the Hegelian dialect. That testing is completely and utterly fraudulent to being able to diagnose a disease. It should never be used to diagnose a disease. But the fact is, okay, they were using it to diagnose a disease, but they were the Department of Defense, and we have this from a Department of Defense whistleblower I was working with at the Army Public Health Center in Fort Meade. They were running the cycle threshold of these PCR tests at 45 thresholds. And if anybody doesn't know what that means, you take a genetic sample, whatever it is, from your nose, from the swab, you put it in this machine and they magnify it to a certain level. Well, if you magnify it past 19, you're going to pass whatever the threshold rate is, you're going to find anything you're looking for. So you create this false sense of a case rate, and then you get the hospitals on board because they're incentivized, and we have ourselves a pandemic. And that leads me to pandemic reprimando. So, like I said, I worked with Dr. Major Sam Sigaloff, U.S. Army. He was also brutally just harassed and came at for trying to give medical exemptions to his patient population for the injections. And he said, hey, Bashaw, we should come up with a morale patch for those individuals that took a stand and tried to communicate and got kind of obliterated by their leadership, whether it was military or, and eventually we changed the wording because initially we had it specifically for military, but we understand this encapsulates all of us. It's not military. It's not, you've got school teachers, you've got police officers, you've got everybody, like I said, that are affected by this war. So we came up with a patch. And then we later came up with a citation for that patch. And I'll read that in just a little bit for those who defy tyrants. Anyway, at this time, I'm kind of rambling, but this is really good. Especially from a bug guide, medical entomologist, public health. I'm like, oh, that's my jam right there. I mean, that's what we, we're all taking a stand, and once enough of us stand, they're already losing it. That's why they're exerting themselves more and more. They're exerting themselves, and they have these crazy panics. You just got to be careful and not feed into that, and evaluate your situation, and not put yourself in a bad position. Peaceful. What did I say? Peaceful non-compliance, right? Peaceful non-compliance. Anyway, at this point in time, I want to bring special individual up, and I want to read off, I got him a little gift, and I want to read off the citation for him for doing, Brandon Hayes, come on up, please. So I'm just going to give a little, a brief background, but Brandon and I, we went to high school, like I mentioned. He was a year ahead of me. We, we haven't talked in, since high school, maybe, right? Since high school. I think it was maybe 3 months ago, a buddy of mine, Justin Elliott, reached out to me. He saw what was going on with my situation, and he told me about Brandon. And I started connecting with Brandon, and Brandon shared with me his 25-minute video of like I said, the best peaceful non-compliance thing I've seen, where he was getting terminated, but at the same time he was educating us. He was educating everybody. He was educating his superintendent, who was just honestly, that beats any movie, any TV show. I watched it probably 3 times, and So at this time, I want to reward him with something. I got this. I flew in. I like to give a little citation reading, if you guys don't mind. All right, come on up, Brandon. Can I take this out?
Yeah, you can take it out.
Sweet. So, like I mentioned, we created a patch, it turned into a pin, and then it turned into a tab. Special Forces have their tab, the Rangers have their tab, Airborne have their tab. Well, Reprimandos, we have our tab. And I can almost bet that many of you in this audience are probably a reprimando. Anyway, I want to read this. COVID-19 reprimanded ranks. This patch represents the courageous men and women who stood and continue to stand against the tyranny set in place due to COVID-19. These are men and women of faith, integrity, and personal courage. Many of these warriors were reprimanded in various ways, such as court-martials, Article 15's General Officer Letter of Reprimand, which is a GOMAR, letters of counseling, letters of reprimand, general discharges, investigated as national security threats, threatened with jail time, banned from the holiday dinner tables, and other forms of disciplinary actions, coercive tactics used against them. Even after being reprimanded, some of whom lost their jobs, their careers, and their good names, these brave men and women continue to remain loyal to God and the Constitution. Together we stand in the furnace, not burned, but purified. We are now known as the Order of the Reprimand. Order was established on 17 September 2022 by the children of the one true God, Samuel N. Sigeloff, Major U.S. Army, and Mark C. Bashaw, First Lieutenant U.S. Army. So, Brandon, this is for you. There's one more individual I want to bring up, and for the purpose of anonymity, I'm going to leave a little his background out of it, but I want to bring up John Daly at this time. John Daly, come on forward. John Daly, I've been working with John, We the People type movement, whatever you want to call it, the warfare, the insanity, dealing with the insanity the past 3 years. True friend to me, my family, and just standing up for the state of Massachusetts, for the children, and for our country. So, John, this is for you. So now Stephion's, it's Special Forces little motto. They've got their flag. It simply means we defy, right? We defy tyrants. We can't simply roll over and kneel down for these tyrants. To have standing, you must stand, and you must stand properly. You can't just bitch and moan about the idiocracy, the insanity, the tyrannicalness. You have to properly communicate with these individuals. You have to serve them. You document it, get it down on paper, because if you don't have standing. There is no standing. There's no proof it ever happened. There's no evidence of it. So that's part of peaceful non-compliance of how we defy. Because, God forbid, we do not want to get to that second step. Anyway, that's my presentation. Questions? I'll take questions. Go ahead.
So, after all the COVID shots on the military, in your opinion, how decimated is our military at this point? And giving away all our ammunition to all these countries, and how are we going to defend ourselves? And where do we come in as civilians to defend the country?
So as civilians, we come in as taking responsibility, as going through discernment, as working together, as communicating with your public servants, right? Putting them on notice if you have to, and finding those good ones that know something's wrong, and giving them the support they need to know they're not alone. You support them, and things like that. So that's what we can do as it's part of our responsibility as Americans. I mean, it's we the people. It's for the people, by the people, we the people. It's, that's what we have to do. And I think events like this, that breaks the algorithm of social media, it breaks the algorithm of the screen in front of our face, because we get to see each other face to face. You can't replace that. Like there's nothing that replaces that, and there's nothing that can. It's just an authentic interaction, and when we can share this information and we can share each other's experiences of what we went through, and we can network with one another, we can work together to move forward and where we need to wherever that may be, hopefully towards a republic, right, and not a de facto corporation. But and to the ammunition side of the house, I think there is a component where there's a good part of the military, just because we have this belligerent executive, what I call a foreign belligerent executive at this time. I do believe, and obviously I work in the open source realms, but there's a lot of compartmentalization in the military and the government in general, highly classified things. But I do believe if there's so much evil in this world, there is good as well, and there are some really good people in the military doing some really good things. And I do kind of take the quote from Sun Tzu, where look weak appear weak when you're really strong. And so that, I got to factor those things in. I don't have a good answer for you, and I apologize for that. But that's kind of my perception. That's what I feel. That's what I see. That's what I know from being in the military so long. And then I'm sorry, I think there was one more question that I might have missed.
How decimated is the military?
Yeah, so it's terrible that we now we have an experimental injection floating around these service members' bodies and many of the general public. And we are seeing incredible signals still in the database. And there was one thing I didn't really mention. When we were tracking the Defense Medical Epidemiological Database and the huge signals, we tracked it when they changed the data on us. They changed it in front of our eyes. We went, Senator Johnson came out at his roundtable, and a week later that data was changed. Wow. And they say it was glitched or whatever the case is. But the fact is, even after their quote unquote glitch, we still see immense signals, and we still see the anecdotal stories of service members dropping dead from myocarditis, pericarditis, finding them dead in their barracks. Not to mention the suicide rates. But it's not good. It's not good that we coerce basically the entire service to participate with the experimental injection. I'm a man of faith, and I pray for divine healing of those members and anybody in this room who were coerced into participation with those products. I pray for their divine healing. And but yeah, it's decimated us in the fact that you now have sons and daughters that the parents aren't wanting them to go serve, right? Why would you want, look at what's happening. So the recruiting is suffering. The retention is all-time lows because the rank and file can't trust their leaders, and they're jumping ship. And they see what's happening, and they're jumping ship. They're not wanting to stay. So, but yeah. So I guess that's kind of my answer to that. Yes, sir.
What was the name of the document that you filed again?
Yeah, Article 138 UCMJ.
Is that a shorter name so I can remember?
So unfortunately, the military is usually good at acronyms, but for that one, it's.
Is it on your website?
Yeah, it's on my website. So it's literally the first. So if you go to my website, you go to Lieutenant Bashaw Saga. Yeah. It's the first thing I submitted to my leadership, and I can tell you that thousands of service members submitted those to their chain of command. And so you have thousands of service members that became protected communicators. And anything that happened to them after that is evidence. Yes, I got destroyed in the short term. I lost everything. I mean, I don't even have my medical records because my truck got stolen when I showed up to San Antonio, literally stolen. It was crazy. But you have all of that. I have all the documentation of the crimes, and you have service members who have that as well.
I agree with you about it being a fifth generation unrestricted warfare that's happening. It seems like this breach or breakdown of the chain of command. If you were able to apply that to the civilian, or if there was a two-level of some degree of officer versus civilian, could we use some sort of reporting system where a redress of grievances could flow up?
Yeah, so civilian side, a petition for grievance. So petition your grievances with your schools, right? Petition them, but yeah, you got to serve it properly. You got to communicate properly. Certified mail. Put them on notice. Certified mail. Why do I say certified? Because when you send it certified, another man or woman has to sign for that, and they become responsible for that. And if they don't address your notice within I'd like 21 days. I usually give them 21 days. And if they don't get back to you in 21 days, turn it into an affidavit of truth. Unrebutted affidavit of truth after a certain time. If they don't rebut it, it becomes judgment of fact. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you're having to go into court because of whatever, you just, well, here's my affidavit of truth. Here's what I submitted, and they didn't rebut it. There's nothing there. So as part of we the people, that's part of our duty, is to reel these public servants in, especially the schools. Put them on notice. I get it. Like, yeah, but nothing's going to happen. Nothing. Well, how do you know that if you don't try? Right? If we're not communicating properly, I get it. Like, they're going to violate the law, but give them an out, give them an option to do the right thing. And then once after that, I mean, that's, I used to tell my service members all the time, if you have a problem with me, come talk to me first, right? And it's the military way. It's the chain of command. If you don't come talk to me first, you have no standing with my boss. Because all my boss is going to say, or my leader above me is going to say, well, did you talk to him about it? No. Well, you don't have any standing. And that's the same thing with the courts. That's why a lot of these cases, they say no standing, right? They just throw them out. It's like, well, what did you do? So I hope that answered your question, and I can ramble.
Well, I want to expand that if you're saying that we're led by foreign belligerents, which I would also agree, and we have access, you did a very brave standing for truth to try to fight the, quote, the good fight. It seems like you could then take it to the people, which was a step that you did.
Yeah.
I think there could be an additional step where you help mobilize the people, because there is definitely militia men that may be on more of the information warfare side that are more than willing to participate with letter campaigns, demands, redress of grievances, but they don't have the languaging of the document, the 11 triple B, whatever, something. But if your group expanded maybe to a confederacy, could help others to mass petition and get more of the chain of command working like in a positive flywheel.
So the positive thing I'm seeing is you have the organized militia and the unorganized militia. The unorganized militia is in my opinion, it's firing on all cylinders, and it's very organic. The way I see it, it's very organic, and there is a lot of us working behind the scenes. I mean, I work with quite and it's not work in the fact that I get paid nothing for this. I get paid, this is service. This is my obligation as a military officer. This is my obligation as an American, that I see tyrants and I must do something about it. I don't get, just like you don't get paid for it. And what's happening is we're starting to share those documents and link up with one another. And that's why I say events like this are so important, because we see each other face to face. We can make that connection. We can understand what your sector is, where you're at, and we can make those connections, and we can bring each other together, and we just build it stronger. And I've noticed when we do that, if somebody needs, like, hey, I need an affidavit over here, or I need this over, it's like snap of the fingers now. Like, I can contact, anybody in the military right now, and there's thousands of them I got contacts with, and be like, hey, X, Y, and Z, and boom, it's answered. We have a direct access. What's interesting now is we have a direct access as we the people to the military members, the organized militia that's still on the inside, right? And
I guess I'll finish with the last thing, try to disambiguate what I'm going for here.
Yep.
Is that the opening line of all enemies, foreign and domestic. We've been told stories of who the foreign enemy is,
Right.
largely at whatever expense of the military-industrial complex wants, but we've never disambiguated domestic enemies. And when they get involved and they try to say it's white supremacist or whatever, we then start to hijack a narrative of what a true domestic
Yes.
enemy would be, right?
Yes.
And what I'm sensing is that all these upsets come from a sense of injustice. Your motion that you did came from an upset and you were clear of what the law was and you weren't following it, right? So there was an injustice and then you become stubborn. We become stubborn when injustice doesn't turn into justice.
Yep.
So I want to contain it. I'm not saying blatant fifth generation warfare means that it's unorganized answers to all forms of violence.
Right.
What I'm saying is that we get very clear about what injustices are, as you have articulated, where the breach is,
Yep.
and then what is the redress for that injustice.
Yep.
Therefore, our points of attack become all morally justified, and that people can resolve their stubbornness and their anger through the success of justice being met.
Yep. I absolutely agree with that. Through a lawful, rational manner. I don't think, like I said, I don't think we're even close to the other steps. So yeah. Any else? Yep.
I've got a question. Yeah, hi. Thanks for being here. My name is Bennett Battle.
Hey Bennett.
Thank you for sharing your story. Just listening to you and having lived through the past three and a half years, I'm becoming increasingly convinced it's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy, and that they mean it when they tell you who they are. They mean it when they do that. They're serious. Can you tell us, kind of just on a personal level, how do you stop from becoming very cynical about all this? It seems like you've kind of come out of this and you have perspective, but I'd like to know for myself, instead of just getting cynical and throwing in the towel and quitting.
Yeah, it's really hard not to, because everything I see now is like, all right, where's the corruption? Where's the holes? Where it's hard not to. But for me personally, it's my faith. It's a faith-based system I have. I give it over. I try to do the next best thing. I try to ask for that discernment. I try to remain balanced in my left brain and my right brain, my emotional and my logical side. And the last 3 years has been, for me, the only reason I was able to get through that and do that and properly take the steps I did in my mind to what I thought was right as a military officer was to give it over. Was literally to give it over and submit every moment of those days and just ask for that discernment and take the next step, but also take the next step and look for one of the blessings, and this kind of pulls me out of the cynical side. One of the blessings and one of the amazing things I saw in the last 3 years is the real service members that I was able to serve with. Like, I served for 17 and a half years, and the last 3 years I met the real service members. I met the real we the people who are standing up, who are doing their best to try to just, hey, at the very least something's not right, to share their experiences and things like that. And that for me has allowed me to stay out of the darkness of the depression, I guess, of the situation, and be more of a optimist and hopeful for the future.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just want to add to that. One of the things that I focus on is trying to know my enemy. And when I pay attention to them and the way that they behave, one of the things that gives me an optimistic hope in the future is the fact that the further we go down this trail of them trying to gain control over us, they push harder their propaganda. They push harder to silence the truth seekers. And one of the things that I have recognized is that they know we're catching on to the lies. So if they're panicking in their own propaganda, like if we have already lost, they wouldn't have to perform propaganda on us. So
You're absolutely right. And I've noticed that they exert themselves harder and harder and harder.
they're panicking.
It was like when I submit to Article 138, an interesting fact that I didn't mention, the staff judge advocate that recommended to send me to a court-martial was Colonel Yevgeny Vindman. Colonel Yevgeny Vindman was the twin brother of Alexander Vindman, the Trump White House whistleblower, the pudgy lieutenant colonel that sat there at the hearing. Well, he had a twin brother. His twin brother just happened to be at Aberdeen Proving Grounds after he got fired from Trump White House. They sent him to be the staff judge advocate for Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Oh, by the way, also fun fact, the commanding general that I tried to perform redress with, he was in charge of all biodefense vaccines for the entire Department of Defense. I didn't find that out till afterwards. And I was like, oh, no wonder they came at me so hard, especially the public health officer. But going back to what you said, they're exerting themselves harder and harder. And what it's doing is, in my opinion, it's having an opposite effect on the person that sits on the fence, right? Person that sits on the fence is like now perking up and like, wait, what's going on? What's happened? And they're now open, or at least somewhat open, to looking for themselves, to using their device instead of their device using them.
Could you speak on how this vaccine rollout is actually a DoD operation?
Yeah, so it was funded through the NDAAs. So it was all funded. All the money was funded through the NDAAs, and that NDAAs went, the National Defense Authorization Acts. It's where the Department of Defense gets their money every year to run the Department of Defense, and they create contracts out of that. And it was a Department of Defense contract that contracted with Moderna, with Pfizer, and with these other companies to push out these injections. And that's why it was under, emergency, right? Emergency. But with that, and that's why this is so important, yes, emergency use authorized. So you have to give people, right? Now, I speak of service members, but my friend, a school teacher, Heart of Boston, same thing. He's covered in the same statute. It's experimental. And a lot of people get hung up on the jabs, and I get it. They're experimental, and we see that they're deadly. We have data, but the masking, like what Brandon occurred in school, the masking is experimental as well. It was one of the worst. It was one of the worst physical, like psychological operations on the mind, because you're just it's fear, and then the testing was absolutely the core of the Hegelian dialect. But I hope that kind of sheds light on your answer.
A military officer used the term Hegelian dialectic.
Oh my God.
That seems like a non sequitur to me. That's not supposed to happen.
I use it all the time, and my buddy, Colonel Brad Miller, he left service at 19 years. He said, no, he could have waited 19 and a half years. He could have waited 5 more months, or however more months, and got his, I'm bad at math, however more months, and got his retirement. And because of this unlawful order, he was like, no, I'm not doing it. And he took a stand. He's out there, but he speaks on the dialects rather more intellectually than I could. But the general concept is they love creating their problems, implementing their fear, and then forcing us into their solutions. But I in the Air Force, part of my job was killing snakes, right? And when you kill a snake, you don't start with the body, you go for the head. So with the Hegelian dialect, you go for the head of the snake. You go for the head. It's the testing. It's not the jabs. Anyway.
So you were talking. What I heard from a couple of people, is some indirect version of, "Wow, you're really freaking persistent, and you stuck with it over a long time." And then what I heard from you was, "Well, I give it over, and I just keep going."
Yeah.
So my perception is, there's too many guys that won't do that, and won't stick with it, long enough to, one, get good enough to argue, and the other thing you do, which is really obvious, because I met you today, right? Was it today? And I just talked to you for a few minutes. Like, you're also maintaining calm professional demeanor, and you don't get emotionally overactivated about it. And so, could you talk to the persistence? And you did touch on it, but could you reinforce not getting overly emotional on it?
Yeah. So the military created me. The military created their problem child. Right? It's like everything I'm doing is in doctrine. It's their doctrine. I went through all those professional. We go through professional military education for a reason, but I guess for some it just doesn't stick. I mean, code of conduct. Code of conduct. Like I said, one of the best trainings I went through, and I kind of alludes to your point, is evasion and conduct after capture. I truly, in a psychological way, we were captured,
Yes.
and still are. And so I had to implement the code of conduct. And if you have ever read war stories and how they've implemented the code of conduct in a physical imprisonment setting, it's like that. But this is completely psychological. Like for example, because I was banned from my place of duty, I'm at home with my kids running around, but I am being, at moment's notice, it goes from 0 miles an hour to 100. And what brought me to 100 was I get a call, hey, you need to have bags packed to Leavenworth. Excuse me, bags packed to Leavenworth? And because I was in so long and I understood the coercive tactics and the shadow policy that they implement, or sometimes, but really bad in the last 3 years, I said, kind of like a deployment? Like you want my bags packed? Kind of like a deployment? Yeah, kind of like a deployment. I said, can you go ahead and send that to me in email? Can you send me that packing list in an email, right? Because jail time was never on the table for my court-martial. They were using it as a coercive tactic to get me to back down. And I was like, okay, send it to me in email. He sends it in an email. I'm like, you dumbass. I'm like, Jude, I gave you an out. It's like, this is the insanity. My commander, I was like, all right, the order comes down. Hey, we're now doing weaponized testing against the unjabbed, right? And at this point, the unjabbed was all the right of conscience individuals. I won't even say religious. I'll just say individuals with a right of conscience, right? And so they weaponize the jab. And I go, hey, are these, and I had to do this legally and lawfully, and I did it, again, properly in writing and communication. Are these merely your orders? Or are these your orders, or are you merely translating these orders for hire? That is your out. To say, I am receiving these orders from hire. That is your out, dude. And he said, just fingers in the ears, just do what I say. And I'm like, dude, you could have just said they're from hire, and I would have just pushed this to the general right away. Mm-hmm. Instead, now you're wrapped up in it. Your signature's on all this documentation. And eventually, when the chickens come home to roost and the other foot drops, Lord willing, you're going to be going to a court-martial. You're going to be in a tribunal. Again, Lord willing.
So let me try that again. What I would like you to do is tell the audience and probably the camera, right, that it was work for you to do that. And at the beginning, were you as confident as you were at the end?
Yes.
The point is, people give up too easily, they don't stick with it. And you can't do what you did. I love what you're, well, I'm a product of the military. No, that was it. You hit that one out of the park. So hopefully I'll get another hit one out of the park.
I gotcha,
But if you see what I'm getting at, it takes fortitude, not only to do a thing, but to stick with it until you become an expert at it.
Yeah. So this goes back to, my brother Corey's here. and I appreciate him showing up. A huge support system for me in my life. Goes back to 2018, July. I got sent home from a deployment early in Panama, and I wanted to kill myself. Instead of killing myself, I submitted myself to my spiritual foundation, which is my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Upon that path of recovery from wanting to kill myself, I kept on asking for discernment. Please show me what I need to see, show me what I need to hear. So leading up to being commissioned in 2019, I was doing open source, just any rabbit hole I could go down on educating myself about what was going on around us, whether it was the monetary system or, all these things. And so when COVID came, I was already tapped into knowing something was coming. I didn't know it was going to last 3 years. I didn't know it was going to be a pandemic. I didn't know it was going to be but I already had a sense of knowing what was going on. I just knew it was wrong. It was going to be bad. And then I'm like, oh my Lord, you sent me to the Army Public Health Center during a pandemic? I was like, oh boy. So I kept my head down for a while. And like I said, I served as commander. I was able to shield the soldiers to a point. And then I did a successful command. I went back to preventive medicine, public health section. And then I saw the door open up to where, you ever hear the story of Leroy Jenkins? It was like, that's what I felt like when they now weaponized. And I knew it was wrong. I had all the doctrine, all the regulations, everything to back it up, to back my actions up. I knew they were going to knee-jerk. I didn't know how it was going to play out. I knew it was going to be hard, but I knew that is my duty. I must do this. This is my duty. This is my responsibility. My responsibility is not to my boss. It's not to the president. That's why when we say the oath, it's literally, simply, just to the Constitution, to that social contract. So that was day in, day out. And what also reinforced my fortitude was when I popped my head up and I breached that door of trying to communicate and refusing and defying, right? I saw the other service members pop up and we all started connecting. And we connected fast. There's thousands of us. We all came together. The first individual I met was Lieutenant Billy Mosley. He was on the USS Bunker Hill. He got kicked off the same day I got banned from all Army Public Health Center facilities. He got banned from the USS Bunker Hill for the same thing. And I was like, boom, and so that helped reinstill what I was doing. And it helped maintain the fortitude to continue to drive on. And what also helped the fortitude was my brothers and sisters, the people that also were dealing with the same thing and were working in their different capacities to try to push back and stand up against this insanity.
So congratulations and thank you for what you've done for all of us.
Thank you all very much. I'll be here both days, and I look forward to talking with each and every one of you, and God bless.
Great presentation.